banning books might be coming to a town near you. The breakdown starts now. Good evening and welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Tara Setmayer. This is the Rick Wilson, and we are back together again. Indeed. After my ventures in New York City with The View. Rick, you were on your adventures for LP, but we are back.
Doing things with stuff and whatnot.
Did a little of this, little of that. But we're back and we have a great show for you tonight. Stay tuned. Our guest tonight is Greg Sargent. He is a Washington Post columnist. He writes the Plum Line. Excellent, excellent writer. And tonight we're going to talk a little book banning because it's a thing, apparently. And he's written some excellent work on this. And we're going to talk to him about that and a couple of other shenanigans of the GOP at the state level. It's out of control. My God.
It's out of hand, Tara. It is just out of hand.
It's a lot. And I don't know if the Democrats are ready for it. So stay tuned for that conversation with Greg. Yeah. Greg's coming up in a minute. We also have a sneak peek of one of our latest ads to show you a little later in the show. So stay around for that. But first, we have a cat sighting. It's Nameless, everyone. Hi, Nameless. So Nameless wanted to come because this is a part of the show where we talk about Black History Month, and Nameless is interested. Tiki's sitting around here too. He's just off camera. It is Black History Month, everyone. It's February, and I think it's important to highlight Black historical figures that you may not necessarily know. Everyone knows some of the more popular names like MLK and all those, but we're going to highlight some of the lesser known because there are a lot of them. So tonight, to kick off our Black History Month celebration, I want to highlight Benjamin Banneker. Who is Benjamin Banneker? Well, he was born in 1731 in Maryland, and he was born free, actually. He was the son of a freed slave and a former indentured servant, and he is an absolutely extraordinary individual. He is a self-taught scientist, he was a mathematician, and an amateur astronomer, and he was able to predict a solar eclipse accurately, which is pretty amazing back then. He also published his own almanac, which is pretty extraordinary. He didn't invent it, but he published one, and he gave it to Thomas Jefferson because he wanted to highlight the humanity and value of African Americans at a time where that wasn't happening. He also did something pretty cool. He built a wooden clock. Now, it wasn't the first clock, but it was among the first in the world, Rick, and it lasted for 50 years. Until it burned in a fire, which is horrible, but that's pretty cool. He also was a surveyor. I don't know if you know this, but there's a high school in Washington, D.C. named after Benjamin Banneker.
Actually,
right.
That is where that name is familiar.
Yes, there's a high school here in the D.C. Named after him, and he surveyed Washington, D.C., which is pretty cool too. So, Benjamin Banneker is absolutely extraordinary. And he represented the best at a time where there was so much oppression. I mean, slavery goes without saying at the time, and really took advantage of his opportunity to not only be self-taught because he was born free, but to give back and create really cool things. So that is our Black History moment of the day, of the show. Benjamin Banneker, cool dude. All right, now let's get into some headlines. We always start off with last week in the Republican Party to kick us off because it is just, the fuckwittery is on 11. Play it.
The Republican Party declared Friday the January 6th attack was simply ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse.
President Trump said I had the right to overturn the election. But President Trump is wrong.
Pence, you're gonna carry this thing eventually to your grave, okay? And you are a stone cold coward.
I talked to the president a couple times that day, but I don't remember the times. I've had lunch in the Capitol, for no reason. It's not illegal to go inside the Capitol.
Did you break through the window to get into lunch?
The sons and daughters of America are not foot soldiers for your party's inept geriatric despot.
Trump's become like a father to me. I get to talk to him just about every single day. He's incredible. He's such a genius.
The fact that he's willing to make a promise at the outset that it must be a black woman, I got to say that's offensive.
President Trump, without question, he's the blackest president that we have ever had in this nation.
You've heard about the infamous chainsaw bayonet. It is real, and we're going to put it to use.
I've told Nancy Pelosi to kiss my mask a long time ago.
We know the masks don't work, and the vaccines don't work.
Can we get you to run for president in the next few years? Or maybe a green DeSantis ticket?
We need to just abolish the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms in the first place.
If AOC was fat and in her 60s, would anyone listen to another thing she ever said?
I'm Mike Murphy, and I'm running for governor.
Okay.
There's going to be an episode of Hoarders in about 10 years. Trump ephemera.
Before we get to the Pence legitimate political discourse RNC stuff that happened since the last time we were all together, I have to say a couple things. Did Madison Cawthorn call Biden a geriatric despot?
Yes.
Is that the new line now?
Yes, he did.
This guy, I'm telling you, he is such a disgrace. And he also, I just saw a video of him trying to imply that January 6th was a false flag. How in the hell is this guy a member of Congress? What are they doing in North Carolina? North Carolina, come on.
That part of Western North Carolina very, very well from childhood to today. I can tell you why.
Well, I'm trying to be kind. I'm from Jersey. But you know what? There's some fuckwits in Jersey too that especially South Jersey, sorry. But it's everywhere. It's really not just regional. Madison Cawthorn, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert, they are the triumvirate of trash. And those aren't my words, well, some of it. But the trash part, even James Carville has called them that. So, come on, people, do better. Do better.
It's important to realize something though. It's tempting because they're loud and they're vocal to say that these people are a noisy fringe of the Republican Party today. They're not. Right. They're the mainstream of the Republican Party today. So if you're at National Review or you're at the Heritage Foundation, in all those places where you want to pretend that the world still centers around Burke and Buckley and Hayek and Kirk and all that,
if only
you are mistaken. The world now centers around Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan and Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and Lauren Boebert and Madison Cawthorn and the rest of the mutant parade. That is the Republican Party today. It is about trolling. It is about culture war. And it is about the absolute retention of political power at all costs. So we watch those. And last week in the Republican Party is a good way every week, folks, for us to show you what's happening inside what was the GOP. Mm-hmm. But it is transforming even more rapidly than we could have predicted into this insane hyper nationalist party. And that's all of them. Your local member of the county school board now most likely believes that vaccines have 5G chips put in there by George Soros and Bill Gates.
My aunt believes that, by the way. Go ahead. She lives in Florida, in your home state.
You know what? My God, the idea that somehow massive business interests could convince people to have a tracking device implanted in their body when we carry these around all the time.
I know.
So, yeah, I mean, look, I wanted to make that point because it is tempting for Republicans who are still in the increasingly small fringe to say, well, no, the Republican Party is just like, George H.W. Bush and Liz Cheney. No, folks. No.
And you know how we know? You know how we know, Rick? We can go to the RNC and what happened on Friday. It's actually a good transition because this is how we know. The Republican National Committee, which is the representation of the National Republican Party. These are the people who set the nominating rules for the nominee for president. They're the ones who put on the convention. They raise lots of money for elections. Like, it's the National Party. These people voted on a resolution to censure Kinzinger and Cheney, which I'm sure you've heard by now. And also, in the language of the resolution, it called January 6th, the people who perpetrated it, ordinary citizens engaged in legitimate political discourse. This is Orwellian to the nth degree. If this is not whitewashing and redefining what we all saw that day, I don't know what is. Legitimate political discourse. I mean, this has been a news story for days now because of how outrageous it is. But that's what they've done. And you just see the video of Kevin McCarthy running like a little bitch because he doesn't want to answer the question.
Dog down that hall. And I will say this: there is a degree to which Kevin McCarthy is still trying to play both sides. With the mainstream media and with donors, Kevin McCarthy is pretending, I've got control of the House caucus. I'm in charge of the RNC. I'm the face of the party. No, dude. If you're so scared, you run like somebody lit your ass on fire when you see a reporter who asks you about this insane resolution from the RNC. You're not in control of anything. You're hardly in control of your own bowels at that point. He was scared. Yeah. And he is a guy who is trying to paper this all over because he is convinced corporate America that he has a great chance of taking back the majority in the fall.
Wow.
He has told them, if you don't play ball, I will screw you politically. I will hurt you financially. I will drag your companies in front of the Congress and torture you. And so a lot of them are playing ball right now. And folks, the Lincoln Project is about to get much more engaged once again on corporate accountability, because a lot of the people who said they were going to play ball with the side of democracy are now playing ball with the side of autocracy.
That's right.
Because they're much more concerned about their quarterly results than they are about the future of this country.
And it doesn't get any more obvious than their response to this. Now, a handful of Republicans have come out and said that they don't agree with that. I mean,
to his credit,
it's Mitch McConnell, right? I know. Well, because McConnell, it's interesting. This is going to be an interesting dynamic to watch between McConnell and McCarthy and how they handle this. The next 8 months are going to be very indicative of where the Republican Party is going to land, because they're threading a needle. With Mike Pence coming out and speaking out against Trump for the first time ever, Mike Pence found his balls and actually said that Donald Trump was wrong and what they were trying to do was un-American. Oh my God, I guess Mother released him for a little bit so that he could actually speak the truth a year later. And that there are still people in the party who that gives a permission structure to them to come out. Well, Mike Pence said it. But I don't know, Pence has zero chance of ever becoming nominee or president, like zero. Mike Cat has a better chance of becoming, Tiki has a better chance of becoming president of the United States than Mike Pence.
Listen, if the choice came down to be me, who Republicans hate with a fiery passion that rivals a billion suns in the center of an inferno, or Mike Pence, I would be president.
You're right. You're right, because he's an apostate. Like, he's worse than us.
He has no followers. No. Mike Pence, look, if three people run for Congress or for the president next time, and it's Donald Trump, Mike Pence, and Chris Christie, if it's just those three guys are in the race, right? They all think they have a lane. Mike Pence thinks he has the true conservative, old conservative,
the evangelical,
whatever, socials. Chris Christie thinks he's got the East Coast, coastal Republicans, bushy Republicans. Well, if those three guys run, Donald Trump will place first in every primary where there is a primary, because there won't be in most places. Chris Christie will place 47th, and Mike Pence will place somewhere around 300th.
Right, that's right.
Those guys have burned themselves to the ground. And Mike Pence, he spoke the truth about the big lie. Now, by the way, I don't give Mike Pence a goddamn iota of credit for doing
Me either.
This guy knew this from the beginning. He knew he was in on this. He was calling people. He was calling lawyers. He was calling the former vice president. He was calling people all over the place. And I have heard of a couple of other calls he made that have not broken yet. That when they do, I think that Trump will a brick. But I got to say, this is a guy who knew what happened, and he kept quiet. He knew what happened, and he didn't speak out. He knew what happened, and he hasn't yet volunteered to go before the 1-6 Commission and spill it all.
Exactly.
Until Mike Pence actually mans up, until Mike Pence actually locates his unit and walks into Congress, sits down, puts up his hand, swears the oath, and testifies, then all of this is performative crap.
Amen. What's left of his unit. So before we bring in Greg, I just want to make one last point about this whole kerfuffle. There's two things that we need to pay attention to coming up. One is CPAC is coming up in 2 weeks down there in Florida.
I guess you're going to have to go to Orlando.
That's going to be a very interesting event. And two, this needle that Ron DeSantis is trying to thread, because he was asked, well, what side are you on? And DeSantis hemmed and hawed and wouldn't take a position about whether he agrees with Pence or Trump.
I'm just going to declare Ron DeSantis is pro-Pence.
Of course he is. Of course he is, because he knows that Pence poses no threat to him. Right. And he's going to run against Trump because he won't say that he won't. Right. And Trump is really, he is going to try to take DeSantis out. And that's going to be glorious.
If you could see the cavalcade of the top name Republican consultants coming to Tallahassee, the ass of Team DeSantis, you would know exactly how serious he is about running for president. It is all he's working on. He's not really running for governor. He's pre-presidenting.
That's a good term for it. Pre-presidenting, or, he wants to be president. Well, let's shift gears.
Ejaculation, if you will.
Oh, God. Okay. That's our cue to now change the subject.
Now, Rick's brought the level of discourse down to where it normally is with Rick involved.
You're supposed to save that for Rick Wilson After Dark.
I know.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. So let's bring today's guest, because we got to talk a little bit more about what's happening in the states. Ron DeSantis is in a state that there's a lot going on there, but there's also other stuff going on places. So I want to welcome Greg Sargent. He's a Washington Post columnist. He writes The Plumb Line, and he's also the author of a pretty cool book that came out a couple years ago. Check that out too, called An Uncivil War. Greg, welcome to The Breakdown. I think this is the first time we've had you on.
Thanks for having me on.
Hey, man, how are you?
Hey, Rick. Long time, man.
Long time. Greg and I have known each other, folks. Here's how old I am. Greg was about 12 then, I guess. We've been since 1997.
That's right.
Way back in the Giuliani era. Good Lord.
Well,
I'll bet you didn't predict what the Giuliani would sink to this level at that time.
No, I got to tell you, that was my powers of forecasting did not extend to the point where he has collapsed to now. I mean, selling 9/11 t-shirts. Oh, it's painful, man.
All of it. Good God. So, Greg, you recently wrote a really, really excellent column about what's happening in the states with this book burning nonsense. I mean, this was something that I'm not book burning, well, book banning, proverbial book burning. Yeah. And I just find it, I live in Virginia, and I watched what was going on with Glenn Youngkin, and I, was concerned about what would happen in our school system with the way that they completely demagogued CRT and the school board issues. And it extends beyond Virginia. Can you talk a little bit about what the hell is going on with this movement to ban books across the country by Republicans?
Well, the key thing that is there are two major features that are in these laws, and we should say that they're really sweeping the country. There are lots and lots of them. There are dozens and dozens of laws and proposals working their way forward in many states that are controlled by Republicans. And these laws have two main features. One is that they give citizens and parents these different types of punitive mechanisms to bring actions against teachers for their supposed offenses and straying from whatever orthodoxy is being enforced in the classroom. And the second one is that these laws are incredibly sloppily drafted so that it's almost impossible for teachers to anticipate how they might break them. And so those two things together, what they really add up to is teachers are really on thin ice, in the sense that they've got to fear that if they say the wrong thing in the class, a parent will decide that it was anti-American, or that it was, struck the wrong tone on race, or made students feel uncomfortable. And that, I think, is the actual point of these laws, which is to make teachers terrified to say anything about anything controversial or difficult about race.
If you look at the attrition rate, Rick, the attrition rate for teachers across the country in these areas, it's unbelievable. We're losing police officers, first responders, and teachers at a really alarming rates because of all of this nonsense. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I mean, Greg, isn't part of this just the broader movement of the Republican Party and the conservative movement, what's left of it, to transform itself into having this sort of completely sealed bubble of information and comfort? I mean, they really want the world to conform to their idea of what it is, not reality. I mean, I just see that a lot now. They want their own media, their own social platforms, their own television channels, their own movies. And it's just, isn't this part of that, like a sort of continuum of all that stuff?
Absolutely. And I think I don't think anyone's actually done the work of documenting this, but it would be really interesting to do. I'll bet you anything that a lot of these Republican state legislatures are increasingly not talking to local media and are really confining their interviews to right-wing media instead. And by the way, coming from this, from a liberal perspective, the difference between what's happening with Republicans and Democrats is really extraordinary. And it was on display in the Virginia race. And Rick, you're a communications dude, so maybe you could explain this to us from the Republican side. Republicans benefit from this kind of massive propaganda network that simply doesn't exist on the Democratic side. And so you had Glenn Youngkin kind of being the cheerful suburban dad in the mainstream media press, and when he was talking to suburban voters. Meanwhile, he was going on Fox and feeding the worst kind of gutter Trumpist garbage to the base that you could conceivably imagine. He was pushing stuff like the DOJ is going to, crack down on parents who are concerned about their kids. And that kind of bifurcated media thing is a real problem for Democrats, because Republicans can really juice up their base without alienating the middle.
Right. That culture war trick now of feeding the red meat to the base, it does depend on the fact that in the States, local media has fallen apart. Political media has mostly fallen apart. When I came back to Florida from DC in 1993, after the first Bush administration ended, moved to Tallahassee. In the state capital, there were 60 political reporters from all over the state. I mean, little towns had Ocala had a political reporter. There are now about 4 people who are spread out covering, the entire state. There's basically one big political blog that does its best every day. But no one feels accountable to the press, and they will talk to the crazies before they will talk to, a legitimate journalistic outlet at any time. They're always feeding the base, and they recognize that if it stays in the bubble of Fox and Facebook, it doesn't get out there to those suburban voters who, like a guy like Youngkin, persuaded, I'm a nice guy in a suburban in a fleece vest. I'm not a crazy person. Well, yeah, he was. He just they weren't seeing it.
A really good example of this is DeSantis signing the voting restrictions on Fox News and giving them the exclusive.
That's right.
Yep.
That's right.
DeSantis is a more sophisticated player than many of the Republicans out there by a good stretch. But he still depends on being able to or being forced to, go out there and play this game all the time. I mean, it's like in The Watchmen where Rorschach says, I'm not trapped in here with you, you're trapped in here with me.
Yeah.
These people are also stuck in that segment of the media population now, where it is harder, if they're doing their job, for them to go on like Meet the Press or another network other than the comfy couch of Fox. because it is a very, the base on the Republican side watches for apostasy like a hawk. They watch.
You guys followed the Ohio primary by any chance? The stuff that's going on there is wild.
In Ohio, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so J.D. Vance, right? Poor J.D. Vance actually thought that Trump voters want to hear, economic populist ideas, right?
Yeah.
And so Josh Mandel and groups associated with Josh Mandel, who's a hard right guy, but wasn't I don't think necessarily that much of a Trumpist before.
No, he was kind of a Bush guy back in the day.
Right. And so, the groups associated with Josh Mandel dropped like $1 million of ads on J.D. Vance, bringing up these old quotes from Vance's past criticizing Trump.
Yeah, he voted for Evan McMullin.
Yeah, and what's funny is Vance is like trying to atone for his heresies about Trump, and finally he broke down and agreed that the election had been stolen, or said something close to that.
Right.
And it may be too late. I mean, he's scrambling to catch up with Mandel, who's like, says in every conceivable forum that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him, and that we should disband the January 6th committee and replace it with a November 3rd committee, and so forth and so on. And Vance, after trying this populist stuff to play to the base, now is scrambling to be as Trumpist as possible, and it just sort of shows you what's happening with the Republicans.
And in Pennsylvania, you've got David McCormick, who was a squishy hedge fund guy, versus Dr. Oz. And the clown show of a lot of these primaries is playing out in a way that, Mitch McConnell is trying to influence these things behind the scenes as much as he can, but you're still stuck with, again, what's the fastest way for a campaign to raise money and get visibility in the Republican Party? It's not to give a speech or go in the local news or do anything like that. It's to get on Fox. It's where the Republicans watch. It's where their eyeballs are every day.
Or Newsmax. It's or to try to get Trump's attention down there in Mar-a-Lago and get, and kiss the ring and get the endorsement from him.
Yep.
I mean, the Senate races this year are pretty extraordinary in not only Ohio and Pennsylvania, but even in Georgia, with this jackass down there running in Georgia. I mean, you've got to be kidding me that these are the crop of candidates that are going to go into the Senate. I mean, Mitch McConnell can't be happy with that. And part of the culture war is what animates all of these people, which is back to the book banning discussion, is what makes this so dangerous, because they're picking out these different culture war issues that are centered around race and ethnicity. And this idea that keeps getting pushed out there of being replaced, of America going to hell. And, some of the, Greg, if you can give some examples of, even the anti-Semitism around banning books about the Holocaust, like if you can just give some examples of some of the more egregious cases of this going on and what people should watch for and what can they do about it?
Well, one of the things that some of these laws do is they essentially say, they vaguely word it like this. They say, teachers cannot use materials that include, and they always use that word, include things like anti-American ideologies. And so, what on earth does that mean? Right. I mean, talk about the bubble, right? Like, so, I mean, you could look at a Martin Luther King tract or an abolitionist tract, and a lot of these writings include the types of sentiments that are off limits in these classrooms now. And that's not to say that these laws explicitly say you can't teach what William Lloyd Garrison said, or you can't teach Letter from a Birmingham Jail or anything like that. But there are concepts in these works that are forbidden, basically. And so if you're a teacher, you're asking yourself, well, can I mention the fact that Martin Luther King at one point said that the white race is the oppressor? I better not say that. I'll be in violation of the law if I say that.
Yeah, and I do think there's a certain degree to which, like, they want to build this snitch culture across the GOP. They want teachers to be scared in the classroom. They want women to be scared of their doctors. They want the fear of people spying on, like, crowdsourcing their spying on things that make them uncomfortable. And I think you're right. That's where the challenge is going to be. We're going to see test cases, I think, all over this country, where a teacher will say, all right, I'm going to teach about the fact that Martin Luther King opposed the Vietnam War. and therefore that's anti-American.
Yep.
I mean, we're gonna, is it only just the Bowderized history, the smoothed out, vanilla milkshake of history they want us to have? Because history is complicated and ugly and weird and uncomfortable for a lot of times.
I think
informative.
Yeah, that's a really important point, I think, because one of the goals of these laws and proposals is to advance an underlying premise, right? And the underlying premise is that there's this, dangerous subversive element loose at large in the classroom that's trying to indoctrinate and psychologically torture your children.
Right.
And in fact, there's a proposal in New Hampshire that actually does ban subversive doctrines, which is, it's a double. There are two layers to this, right? One is obviously the effort to put teachers on notice and scare the living heck out of them. But the other is to tell parents that there are all these subversives around their kids.
Right. And
it's modern day McCarthyism.
And look, I can tell you this as a former Republican, projection is the name of the game. And there is a knowledge on their part about indoctrination. And they would like to indoctrinate a economic nationalist populist movement in this country that pretends we've never had a challenge about race at all in our history, that everything's been smooth since the beginning, and that there wasn't a fundamental and nearly fatal flaw in the original drafting of the Constitution. We treated African Americans like 3/5 of a person, and we paid for that in lives and pain for generations and generations, and they would like to pretend that didn't happen. And
they'd like to pretend that what they're doing now doesn't have roots in that oppression again, with the civil, with voting rights and voter suppression, and this idea that only voter fraud happens in these urban centers. This is all part of that nefarious attempt to whitewash history and to gin up their base on racial resentment. And it's scary. That's why people talk about a potential civil war. I mean, Adam Kinzinger on cable news yesterday actually acknowledged that he's concerned that we could go down the path of a civil war in this country. He said if you'd asked him that a year and a half ago, he would have said no way. But after January 6th and what he has seen in the response to it, he said that this is something that's a very real possibility if people aren't held accountable for it, and if the American people don't wake up to what the plan is here to do this.
Yeah, it really is interesting. I did a thing today that tried to document the number of Republican Senate candidates who are not just echoing and supporting Trump's lies about 2020, but taking the additional kind of repulsive step of also saying that these big outbreaks of voter fraud occurred in urban centers. They're very deliberately saying that. By my count, 4 major Republican Senate candidates are saying that.
That wouldn't surprise me at all, because the idea, again, it's the projection is strong with this group. The voter fraud that we picked up in Florida so far this year, when Ron DeSantis finally gets his voter fraud police, they better go to the villages.
Yeah.
They better go to Republican neighborhoods in Miami, because that's where it's happening.
Well, if they're going to the villages, they also should bring a mobile clinic over there, because I hear that there's high STD rates in the villages. I'm just, anyway, on that note, Greg, I want to thank you for your work, and in your columns. You're fantastic. And I wanted to mention, this is an ongoing conversation about banning books. This is more serious than just a couple people getting their, pearl clutching over a couple of books they don't like. This is a national effort, and it has larger implications, and it is straight out of an authoritarian playbook. But there is a really cool program called Little Libraries that I discovered in researching this topic. The Little Free Library is a movement in communities where you can set up these little library things there you see in your neighborhood, and you can have a book exchange for free. So this is something, a response to what we're seeing, because it's important for people to read these books. And we've put a call out on social media. So if you're watching, send us your favorite book that is either banned or being discussed about, as possibly being banned. We want to know. And there's a movement now, it looks like, on the New York Times bestseller list that some of these books have there's been a resurgence in purchasing these books because of the attention they're getting. And we want to make sure that people get a chance to read them. So you got the little free library movement. If you want to get involved, that was the website. And then also go out and buy these books. Call your bookstore and ask them to put these books in a front, in a prominent place so people can see them and be reminded of why they're classics and why we need to be reading them and not let the other side win.
If you're Jeff Bezos on Amazon, why don't you make these books available to students at either free or highly discounted rate? Because they're important.
That's right. Absolutely. Greg Sargent, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate seeing you, man.
Thanks so much, guys. Good to see you, Rick, after all these years.
Greg is great.
Yeah, he's very, very smart guy. And, we've disagreed over the years on a ton of issue stuff, but we agree on the fact that what's happened to the Republican Party is it has become a threat to democracy.
That's right.
And
that's right.
And I genuinely have always liked Greg, no matter how many ideological disagreements we could have.
Yeah, me too.
I always liked him as a person. He's just a solid guy, good dude. And I'm really glad we had him on. It was a good call.
Me too. So make sure you check out his columns and follow him on Twitter. All right. So as promised, we said that we were going to give you a exclusive peek at our latest ad. So here it is, Clown Show. Speaking of Ohio.
The J.D. Vance campaign is proud to announce the endorsement of Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. J.D. Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene are your voice on the key issues. The Las Vegas shooting massacre that killed 58 people? Marjorie Taylor Greene says it was a conspiracy to attack the Second Amendment.
I don't believe that he pulled this off all by himself, and I must be no leader.
When the power grid went out in California, J.D. Vance's Marjorie Taylor Greene saw the real truth and blamed Jewish space lasers. J.D. Vance's Marjorie Taylor Greene knows the real truth behind 9/11.
There's never any evidence shown for a plane in the Pentagon.
J.D. Vance and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Conspiracies, Jewish space lasers, and 9/11 truth. Vance and Greene. They'll be Ohio's voice in Washington.
She is an embarrassment to the state of Georgia.
Yes, she's talking about you, honey. Oh my gosh. Well, Greg didn't know that we had that ad coming out. He teed it up great when he used J.D. Vance in Ohio as an example. That is literally a clown show going on out there. So that will be released widely tomorrow. Well, that is it for our show tonight. I want to remind everyone, please send us your favorite banned books, #AskTheBreakdown, or you can send it to us anywhere on our social media and Instagram and YouTube and things like that. Because we're going to pick out a list, and if we pick out yours, we might get some free swag on Thursday. We like to give away a little swag. We haven't done it in a while. So make sure you do that for us for Thursday. And tomorrow night, don't forget, we're speaking with our sisters over there at We're Speaking, Lisa and Maya, tomorrow at Wednesday. And speaking of Maya had some things to say about, our favorite person, Ted Cruz. So we end the show tonight with a little word from Maya May.
Absolutely.
We'll see you Thursday.
Thanks, folks.
Ted, we got to talk. You might have been great at debating, but you are terrible at adapting. And that's why you'll never be president. And so you turn your anger on the people who do know how to adapt. People like me, black women. So when you say it's offensive, Biden made a promise his SCOTUS pick would be a black woman and then said we're only 6% of the country, what I hear you saying is, why won't America pick me? But if you had half the resilience, patience, and love of country it takes for a black woman to thrive in America, where until 1868 we were just a fraction of a human being, you'd know Biden's not offensive. You are. And more offensive than your words, your fear. It's sickening. I mean, I get it. I get why you want to leave. Not just how you flew to Cancun when things got chilly, but how you want to leave behind the ideals of our nation because you're afraid it no longer values you. Senator, your role, whether you choose to accept it or not, is to represent the totality of your state, and that includes black women. We're here to stay. But don't worry, we aren't here to replace you. We're here to grow, to evolve, to hear the voices of all Americans, even yours, because representation is how we live up to our promise. Just because you can't evolve doesn't mean America can't.